this was the house of Marie Laveau. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. This was built about 25 years after she died. But she did live at this spot for most of her life. And it's only about a block and a half from here to Congo Square, which is where she worked. So it was a very quick commute. Now, Marie Laveau is one of these characters from history, kind of like, I don't know, William Wallace or somebody, who looms so large in our history, but who we actually know very little definitive about. We do know a couple of things for sure, but even these are kind of mostly for sure, so there's a big asterisk here we got to be aware of. So she started her career as a hairdresser, a very high-end hairdresser, cutting the hair of the richest, most beautiful ladies in town. And like a lot of people in that profession, she heard quite a bit of gossip. And these ladies, her clients, these were like the daughters and the wives of the upper crust of white society, you know, the aristocracy. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to suggest that these ladies might have been a little bit self-absorbed. And so when she was cutting their hair, they would just prattle on about themselves. And Marie Laveau would listen and keep cutting. And after a while, it felt like she knew these women who didn't look at her twice. But when she would see them out in the street, could be weeks or months later, she'd go up to them and say, oh, hey, how's it going? You know, how's that thing with your mom? You know, I know it was kind of touch and go there for a second, or whatever the family gossip might be. And they would go, how did you know? And so a legend was born, a legend about a woman who knew things she couldn't possibly know about. Some of the most enduring legends about Marie Laveau are that she lived to be 120, that she never aged, and that she could be in two places at once. Now, there is a pretty interesting modern-day theory about this, which pretty much has to do with her family. So she was married twice, first to a free man of color named Jacques Perry. It's not a good marriage. He cheated on her, and after a very short time, he just disappeared, went to buy the proverbial pack of cigarettes and never came back. And soon, she met and fell in love with a white man by the name of Christophe Glampion. They had a left-handed marriage, as they would have called it, basically an illegal interracial marriage. And they were the loves of each other's lives, were together until his death, and they had a lot of kids. A lot of kids. 7 to 15, depending on who you want to believe, including many daughters. Daughters who just happened to look an awful lot like Marie Laveau. And so there's this modern-day theory that maybe Marie Laveau wasn't just one person. Maybe she was like a family business, you know, kind of like Batman.
Do you see what it sounds like?
Now, this is just a theory, but there is some pretty compelling evidence to suggest that Marie Laveau's eldest daughter, Marie Laveau II, as she's commonly known, did continue her mother's work in some sense. Whether she literally pretended to be her mother or simply kind of took on her more physically demanding responsibilities when she had gotten too old, that is very much a matter of debate. I would sort of lean toward the latter, but I encourage you guys, please do your own research, come to your own conclusions. We just have to use such a healthy helping of guesswork when talking about and researching Marie Laveau's life. Now, one thing that I don't want to convey in this is I don't want to give the impression that Marie Laveau was some kind of a charlatan. I think she was very sincere in her belief. Sure, a lot of 20th century historians have called her, you know, a cynic and a con artist or whatever, but she was a devout Catholic and a devout voodoo practitioner. In fact, she went to Mass every single day of her life, as far as we can tell. And she cared about genuinely helping people, and I think that's why she's so beloved here in the city and across the country today. I mean, people love her, and, you know, I think it's because of the integrity and the fearlessness and the charisma that she showed. For example, just one example, she and her acolytes were very active in helping out victims of yellow fever here in the city. They would go into these hospitals where these yellow fever patients were being cared for, and they would help out. And this was considered almost stupidly dangerous. It was incredibly, it seemed near suicidal, because nobody knew how yellow fever was spread. They wouldn't until 1903, when they discovered that it was spread by mosquito bite. People thought it was miasmas or evil vapors. They had no idea. So that's the level of commitment that she had to working toward her community. Now, granted, there's also been a big resurgence of interest in voodoo since like the early 1990s. And Marie Laveau's tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 is one of the premier tourist attractions in New Orleans. Millions of people every year go to visit her grave. It's one of the most popular grave sites to visit in the country. Unfortunately, though, it's seen quite a bit of vandalism over the years, mainly by people who believe that if they draw 3 X's on Marie Laveau's tomb and make a wish, then she'll basically grant their wish. Now, this thing was invented in the 1960s by a tour guide looking for better tips. It is not an actual voodoo practice. Marie Laveau, as a devout Catholic, would not want anyone vandalizing or marking up tombs in a Catholic cemetery. And typically, you know, the story goes that, oh, well, you know, if Marie Laveau grants her wish, then you're supposed to come back to St. Louis #1 and circle the X's on the tomb. Now, I'll put up a picture of Marie Laveau's tomb. This is before it was restored. Pretty telling, don't you think? Yeah, thankfully, it was restored in 2014. And many of the X's were, you know, power washed off, and they sort of put a new coat of plaster over the exposed brick and all that. But people still vandalize it. Unfortunately, they'll take their keys and they'll scratch the X's into it that way, which is really a crying shame. But I am glad that it is in better shape than it used to be. People also leave a bunch of stuff on Marie Laveau's tomb. People leave hair ties, hair clips, you know, referring to her career as a hairdresser as well as her capacity as the Voodoo Loa of love and beauty. She's very much an Athena-like figure in voodoo today. But Marie Laveau's favorite offerings on her tomb by far are alcohol, tobacco, and money, because they always seem to be gone the next day. It's just the weirdest thing.